Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first panel in our event series on a roadmap to climate action in the Middle East, North Africa, in partnership with the World Bank and the Middle East Institute. Hopefully, you had a chance to attend our opening session and remarks a few moments ago, earlier. And so now we're going to dive into the nitty-gritty. So this panel, our first one, is focused on climate-smart approaches to natural resource management. And I'd like to hand it off to the moderator of this session, Leah Sieghart, who's a practice manager of environmental, natural resources, and blue economy global practice at the World Bank. Leah?
Thank you so much, Mohammed. It's really a delight to be here. I'm not slurring too much. I just had a dental procedure done, so please bear with me. No, first of all, it's really a delight, and I really wanted to welcome all the participants to this sharing event, and it's really a delight to be here and be joined by amazing colleagues. I'll introduce them a little bit later, so I'm really delighted, and I'm very honored to have you all with me. And this panel is particularly going to focus on the linkage between climate change and sustainable natural resources management. So I think that's really an important topic, and I'm glad that we were able to mobilize it. And as I said, I'm really pleased to being able to moderate it, but also having the pleasure to invite four very experienced and experts for sharing their knowledge and their expertise in the role of natural resources management in the fight against climate change. But I also wanted to use the opportunity to thank Andrea Kutter for really pulling everything together and getting us all organized, and for all the leadership behind the scenes, and also, of course, our colleagues from the Middle East Institute. So thanks a lot for that. Just to guide you a little bit how we are going to structure the next hour. So I'll start, give a few words in terms of an overview on the linkages between sustainable natural resources management and climate change. And then I will introduce briefly our guest panelists, and then I'll start off, and then I'll also give each of them a question, and I'm very much looking forward to what they have to share with us. And then I'll take stock of the main issues that were flagged, and sort of have some closing messages at the end. But let me started off with a couple of points from here, and particularly stressing the importance of natural resources for the Middle East and North Africa regions, because they are really at the core of the livelihoods of millions of people. And also, as when we looked at the region's human capital as well as the physical capital, that has really improved over the last couple of years or decades even. But when you look at the natural capital, that has significantly declined. And we just had the pleasure just launching about 2 weeks ago a new flagship report that was prepared by the World Bank, led by our colleague Martin Hegger. And the report is called Blue Skies and Blue Seas, where we really looked at the performance of the region's economies and on very many environmental indicators, and particularly in the blue space. That's why it's also called Blue Skies and Blue Seas. And it really shows the deterioration of over the past couple of decades. On one hand, emissions have increased, terrestrial and marine ecosystems have deteriorated, natural habitat has been destroyed. Then we see marine pollution, particularly plastic pollution. When we look, for example, at the Mediterranean, there's more plastic going into the Mediterranean Sea than fish getting out of the Mediterranean Sea, so that's very alarming. Then also ocean acidification has increased, and unsustainable water management and water stress. And we really looked at in that report as well, when you look at the scale of how natural blue assets have decreased over time, and we are losing basically in the region about 3% GDP annually of natural blue assets. So this is quite alarming. On the other hand, also that when you look at coastal erosion in the Middle East and North Africa region, coastal erosion in that region, in our region, is 10 times faster than the global average. And then also when you look at air pollution, for example, that the cities are more than 5 times higher than recommended guidelines by the WHO, and there's no city in the Middle East and North Africa region that meets the WHO guidelines in terms of air pollution. So it's really quite alarming. So I think this discussion comes at a very timely moment. But climate change is not only one of the main stressors for natural resources. Sustainable natural resources management is not only one of the most effective approaches to contribute to climate change mitigation, but also building resilience. And I think building resilience and adaptation is a very key element, particularly for MENA. But also it provides an opportunity for the livelihood basis, particularly for rural communities, and contributes for conserving biodiversity. And then to our panel today, we'll really look and discuss at climate smart approaches to natural resources management. And here really zoom into the linkages between natural resources and climate change, and also a stable society. So I think that's a very important nexus, and I'm very excited to learn from all of you. So as I said, I'm very pleased to have 4 outstanding experts with us today, and the panel will work as follows. As I mentioned at the onset, I'll pose a question to each of the panel members and let them really share their views, their experiences, and their thoughts. And really, panel members are encouraged to directly reflect also on the previous speakers' input with a view to either further develop ideas or contrast them also, so that we really have a lively and engaging reflection on these topics. So without further ado, it's really my pleasure to turn to our first panelist. So we have Carole Megouin with us. Carole is connected from Morocco. She is a program leader for sustainable development for the Maghreb countries. And Carole has an experience of over more than 25 years in international development across a number of regions. And she has also 2 master's degrees on agricultural economics and environmental and natural resource economics. And as I said, we're currently based in Morocco, so I'm very delighted to have her with us. And she's overseeing the Sustainable Development and Infrastructure Program that was beforehand in Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and also managed a number of very complex operations on natural resources in various of African countries, and now supporting the SD agenda for the Maghreb. So I'll hand it over to Carole. And Carole, for you, the question would be, where do you see, or what is the potential for natural and ecosystems to contribute to several aspects of climate change, including mitigation? Also on the one side, on the green and on the blue agenda, and sustainable forest management and natural-based solutions. Over to you, Carole. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot, Leah, and really a pleasure to be here with you. So good afternoon and good morning to all the participants. So, well, I would start by saying, Leah, that I'm quite hopeful that I think that nature is now back, and that countries now understand that they cannot just look at economic development without, looking at what is the underlying force behind the economic development. You mentioned in your introductory remarks that the natural capital is depleting, and I think there is a recognition that it may be a problem for the economic path for the countries, especially in the Maghreb region. I think that's a recognition that really came to front, after the COVID crisis, when countries came to realize that maybe that was the moment to build back better and to go greener, more resilient, and more inclusive. So I think we are in a very good spot to really make sure that all those different solutions that come from sustainable management of natural resources are taking full dimension in this new Build Back Better model that we are hoping that we will be able to see in many countries. So let me start just by giving a few examples that give me hopes of really on the fact that we are getting to another phase in terms of how we could really mainstream those solutions in terms of natural resource management to not only support the climate change agenda, both on mitigation, adaptation dimension, but also in terms of biodiversity, in terms of livelihoods, and in terms of all the different benefits that those solutions can bring if they are done properly. So I'm getting very excited because I see that there is really a momentum that's been created over the past month, I would say, and that this is an agenda that is taken by many stakeholders that didn't have that really on their radar so far. So I would just like to share a few examples. But first of all, we had in Morocco the pleasure to prepare two plans for city urban resilience, one in Mohammedia, which is a coastal city, and the other one in Fez, which is the emblematic imperial cities that everybody knows in the region. And interestingly, in both cases, we had nature-based solution very, very high on their urban resilience plan. So the first one was very much to tackle the issue of floods and sea level rise and the erosion of the coast. The other one was more on the flood dimension as well, but also on the heat waves that is really plaguing the countries, the city more and more. It's also about creating a more a welcoming environment, with trees and parks, and that's part now of the touristic offer that the city wants to bring. So we can see that it's mainstreaming the idea that a city needs to use this nature-based solution to really support its sustainable development. So that's one example. Another one that I thought I would share with you, and it's very much in the media those days with the huge drought that Morocco is facing, about water scarcity and what to do about water scarcity. And Morocco, has been a champion in building, large infrastructure, dams, and also improving the irrigation system, very much relying on the hard infrastructure, I would say, to really respond to these water scarcity challenges. But now they are very much turning, in addition to this engineering solution, they are very much turning to nature-based solution to really see how they could go further and they could get to the next step. Just look at dams, huge capacity, but when your dams are empty because there is no water, you need to think through another solution. And what comes to mind very, very strongly in this discussion we're having with the different stakeholders is how can we better manage the watershed, the upstream watershed, to make sure that we have a better flow of water, and also to make sure that we are not eroding the capacity of the dams that we are building through siltation. So we are seeing this solution coming up very strongly, and it doesn't come either or, the hard infrastructure versus the soft infrastructure, but really very much more as a comprehensive package and to make sure that they will be benefiting one from another. Another example that I would like to put on the table, but you mentioned that, Leah, very much on the blue economy and the fact that we are seeing, unfortunately, this natural capital depleting, being on the coastal, being on the marine. And I think that there is also a recognition that actions need to be taken. And this goes very much in line with tackling, the climate change in terms of reducing the threat of coastal erosion with the sea level rise, and also looking at the opportunities when it comes to mitigation, with the seaweed aquaculture, for example, that could become another sink for carbon within the ocean. So I think Morocco is leading the way with the preparation of the Blue Economy program, and it's very much looking at all these dimensions about looking at the opportunities in the blue economy, in terms of restoring the natural capital in a way that will make it more resilient and a sink on carbon, and at the same time providing opportunities for livelihoods and economic opportunities. So I think that's a very nice, angle where it brings all these different benefits together. So all these good examples, but maybe just a question. So if everything is so nice and all these co-benefits coming at the same time, why wouldn't we see that more systematically? And I think that's important for us as well to debate a little bit on why those solutions that have very often been proven very beneficial, at the pilot level, why is it so difficult to scale it up? And I think there are 3 points that I would like to highlight. The first one is very much on the knowledge. Sometimes there are some pilots, but it's not disseminated in terms of the different practices that could be put in place and that could be adopted. And I wanted to just use the example of the no-till practices. Morocco has a huge ambition in scaling up the no-tillage practices to protect the soils, to make sure that the rain-fed agriculture will be less vulnerable to climate shocks. These activities have been proven very efficient financially, economically, environmentally for years in Morocco and in other countries, but yet it's still lagging, in terms of adoption by the farmers. So what they're doing in Morocco is really pushing for this scaling up in the adoption, but mostly by, supporting the farmers for the adoption through extension, training, advisory services. And this is the big soft part that will hopefully make, some changes in behaviors and that will facilitate the adoption of those practices. Another dimension, which I think can be a bottleneck, is about the fact that those solutions are not the usual solutions that people are used in implementing. And very often they require more of a coordinated approach or a partnership approach, bringing different expertise together. When I was telling you about the watershed management for the dams, well, usually when you have engineers working on dams, they don't have the forestry expertise. So they need to rely on other type of expertise that are sitting outside of their own ministries and, bringing this type of coordinating and integrated approach. Sometimes it's difficult. We are all facing some coordination issues, and in countries as well, we can witness that. So as a World Bank, we are really trying to push for this coordination and this partnership and making sure that we can help on bringing up those type of integrated approach. And maybe the last point that could be a bottlenecks in the adoption and the scaling up of those operations is that even though that we can see that they are very often paying off by themselves, down the road, those practices are usually not only environmentally beneficial, but also economically, they bring value to the adopters. They often come with upfront costs. The transition to these new practices usually generates some additional costs, and sometimes it's just something that is not easy to tackle. So bringing, new solution, financial solution, engineering in terms of the financial structure that we can bring. This is also something that at the World Bank we are looking at, to make sure that it comes when it's needed and that it really provides the financing that is needed to transition. So, Leah, I will just stop there. And thank you again for inviting me to participate to this panel. Very excited about the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. And I also very much enjoyed your provocative question, really saying, why is this not always being implemented at a large scale, although very successful at pilot level? And I think that's exactly where it stands. And I think this really needs further discussion, further thinking. So without further ado, it's my real pleasure to invite and welcome Professor Cavi Mandani, who is an Iranian environmental scientist. He's also an educator and activist, and he's working at the interface of science, policy, and society. He's currently a visiting professor at the Center of Environmental Policy at the Imperial College in London, and has previously served as Deputy Vice President of Iran in his position as the Deputy Head of the Iranian Department of Environment, the Vice President of the UN Environmental Assembly Bureau, and the Chief of Iran's Department of Environment and International Affairs and Convention Center. Also, Professor Cavi has received several awards and recognition for his fundamental research contributions, teaching innovations, as well as outreach and humanitarian activities. Let me just point out the one a very critical award is he won the Walter Hubert Civil Engineering Research Prize in 2017 for his groundbreaking work on and research in the developing methods for the allocation of scarce water resources, merging conflict resolution and game theoretic concepts for application to complex water resource systems, and outstanding leadership in the application of systems analysis to environmental, water, and energy resource problems. So it's really a delight having you with us, Professor Cavi, and thanking you for joining that discussion as a panelist. For you, I would like to see whether you could give us a little bit of your views and your inputs on the questions with growing concerns over food and water security. What policy reforms do MENA countries and countries in the regions need to meet natural resource needs of the increasing populations? So with that, I'll hand over to you. Over to you, Professor Cavi, please.
Thank you so much, Leah, for your very kind and generous introduction. Thank you, colleagues at the World Bank and the Middle East Institute for organizing this event, which is very, very relevant, especially at a time that we are seeing a big conflict not too far from the region, which would have dramatic consequences on the economies of the region, food security, etc. That is a topic related to your questions. We are talking about green recovery, the role that technology can play in changing the current landscape, in stopping environmental degradation, and so on for a long, long time. We have been talking about water scarcity, water bankruptcy, and in the whole Middle East. Water shortage is nothing new in the region. Those of us who grew up in the region are familiar with droughts, floods, extreme heat, and some other related extreme events in some countries, dust storms, and so on. But over the years, we have also seen the degradation of wetlands, rivers, decline of groundwater level, and so on, because the region has, like many other places in the world, has tried to pass through the stage of development of the agricultural sector, providing jobs to the rural populations, and also securing food for the population. The food demand has been growing in the region with population growth. And when the population is increasing, it's not surprising to see water availability declining, and then food availability becoming an issue, and food security being an issue. And you have always this drama and let's say dilemma of relying on food imports versus producing things at home. Production at home can bring food security at a time right now that a lot of countries are dependent on food imports from Ukraine and Russia, for example. We will see a lot of consequences. So at these times, at the times of conflicts, at the times of sanctions, at the times of war, being independent can perhaps be helpful. Because famine is an extremely problematic issue, given the fact that the injustice implementation, it affects the poor more than others, and that's a very scary thing to happen. It has a lot of human insecurity consequences. But but when you look at your resources, like in the Middle East and North Africa, we are dealing with a region which has, geographically speaking, has less potential for agriculture because of water availability. One of the most fundamental material you need for agriculture, the input material, is water, and then quality of soil, and so on. So we heard this in your opening remarks also, that we are dealing with a region that is losing its natural capital, and this is a very important thing. A lot of damages that we are causing, or we are seeing in the Middle East, would be irreversible in a short time horizon. And this is extremely scary because gradually the potential for farming and production is decreasing. We are neutralizing this through adoption of technology, but that's not going to be sufficient. And this is a very, very frustrating issue for the region. Now, when we want to tackle this problem, I think this is something we need to understand. And, especially if we are sitting in the West and try to prescribe solution for that part of the world, those of us who are sitting at intergovernmental agencies and thinking about helping the member states of the region. Of course, the member state, the region, the countries in the region are different in terms of size, resource availability, and so on. So we have some economies which are oil dependent, some economies which are different, but most of the economies in the region are very, very resource dependent. They extract natural resources to survive, but most importantly, to provide jobs to the poor. And if you want to address these problems, we have to understand that this is not a simple hydrologic problem. It's not a simple mass balance of water problem. This is not an engineering problem either. If you want to understand the problems of the Middle East in terms of water availability, food security, and so on, we have to understand the political, we have to use a political economy lens. This is how we can understand what the role of water is in the region. Water, more than you know that the water has a role of hygiene and sanitation, and globally speaking, that's something that a lot of water experts are occupied with, wash and development, that kind. But then there is another major role that water is playing in the Middle East, and that is providing jobs to the poor. When the jobs are gone, when there is a big drought, when the water system is not resilient and cannot tolerate extreme events, then farmers lose jobs, the rural communities lose jobs, the poor lose jobs. And when unemployment comes, there would be forced migration, marginalized societies, battles between different groups of societies, internal domestic war, mass migrations, and so on. The things that we have seen in this region of the world. Syria, the Syrian example, is a very classic and good example. If we want to address this problem, if we're talking about green recovery, we have to question whether we can fundamentally change the economic development model in the region. Can we diversify the economies enough to decouple the economy of the region from water and other natural resources? This is a big question. Yes, technology can help, some loans and these things can help, but we have to go beyond quick fixes. We have to make fundamental reforms. And if we want to do that, if we want to apply fundamental reforms to the economic model of the region, you have to respect the fact that you have to be concerned about livelihood. You have to provide alternative jobs and means of livelihood for the poor, for the rural communities, and for the farmers. If you do that, then you can talk about increasing efficiency. A good thing about the region is that water use and resource use in the region is quite inefficient. Why do I say it's a good thing? Because it provides a lot of opportunities for us to make improvements, to increase the resource use efficiency, which would be beneficial for the people. It increase the income, increase the yield and production, but also we can minimize the harm and reduce the harm. So there's plenty of opportunities out there that we can tap into, while keeping in mind that gradually we have to decouple the region's economy from water. If we do that, then we can think about trades. When it comes to food security, I think it is also very important to redefine food security given the concerns of the region. So there is a definition of food security given by FAO. But right now, when we are seeing the world, how the world is suffering from what is happening in Ukraine, we have to ask if food security is only about nutrition and food flow, or does we should also think about where food is being produced. These countries and the countries in the region can also revise their crop patterns, land use, and so on, to make sure that they produce some level of cereals and important crops within their territories. And that is possible. And right now, a lot of water is being wasted or used for producing low value crops, which don't have nutritional value, but they are good and can be traded in the market, because at the end of the day, farmers need income and jobs. If you can provide alternatives, then you can ask them for the change in their behavior and the choices they make. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Cavi, and particularly on your thoughts on the reform processes and versus an approach that is more geared towards short-term fixes. And I'm quite inspired by your thoughts here, and I'm looking forward to further discussion on that topic. Without further ado, I have really the pleasure to invite now and welcome Madame Khulud Al-Ajami, who is a lecturer at the Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Edinburgh. And she holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of Groningen and a MPhil in anthropology and international development from the University of Bergen, and MA in peace and conflict studies from Coventry University. Ram Al-Ajama has worked in fields of anthropology, Islam, refugee studies, gender, youth leadership and water and migration, human rights, as well as visual culture in several countries in the Middle East, as a particularly also the Mediterranean region. And she's also an award-winning photographer and filmmaker whose work focuses on the everyday life and refugee experiences in Palestine. With a very warm welcome, and we are very delighted to have you with us. And I wanted to see with you if you could elaborate a little bit on what is the social dimension of climate change, and where do you see the social dimension of climate change, and particularly on natural systems? Where do you see here also the risks and the opportunities? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leah, for the kind introduction, and thank you for the organizers of this timely and relevant event. Regarding your question, I think climate change and its risks, such as water scarcity, droughts, displacement, and so on, are not socially neutral. While all of us are impacted by climate change, certain groups, certain social groups are more vulnerable to the crisis, such as female-headed households, children, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, migrant workers, gender minorities, and older people. And therefore, the vulnerability and the adaptive capacity of those groups are shaped by various gender norms, social relations, and power inequalities that continue to exist in societies, in addition to the differences between rural and urban areas, rich and poorer communities, etc. One example that came to mind when you asked your question and has been with me for a couple of months now is that of a Moroccan child, Ryan, a 5-year-old Moroccan child, and you might have seen the news about his story, who fell in a 32-meter deep dry well outside of his home village in the Chefchaouen province in northern Morocco. You might have heard the story and how after an earth-moving operation that lasted for 5 days, unfortunately, he died soon after the removal from the well. Upon discussing this tragedy with other Moroccans that I worked with, many spoke about how this story relates to the reality of digging unauthorized random wells in rural areas of Morocco as a response to drought and water scarcity, which have expanded over the past years. Other Moroccans that I have spoken to related the tragedy to the reality of water scarcity in general and the effects of climate change on the most vulnerable, linking it to larger social inequalities on the state level, which lead to people being affected differently by the risks caused by climate change. Here I limit my response to 3 aspects that the people that I work with mentioned when we talked about the risks related to climate change. One is the economic effects of climate change, which are related to the unequal distribution of natural resources. Access to agricultural capital, for example, and land ownership are some examples of this. Women in particular were identified as most likely to be affected by climate change, or one of the groups most likely to be affected, but they have across the region, not only in Morocco, they have less access and control over lands if compared to men and male family members. These discriminatory norms and inequalities in access to resources put women at a disadvantage. And in many countries in the region, the women are advocating for equal rights to access to natural resources, which in their view is a way to mitigate these inequalities. Secondly, climate change impacts migration, and there is no direct links made specifically linking migration to climate change, although climate change is seen as one of multiple and many factors that lead to migration. But the fact that it is a factor of leading to migration, it also needs to be something that we have to look at how migration flows internationally and nationally affect these power relations and social relations. So, for example, research shows that in the cases of migration, the most vulnerable groups are often left behind, and these groups end up facing intensive workloads and add to their responsibilities. So these migration dynamics are also something, a risk to be taken into consideration when thinking about climate change. And also despite the fact that major steps have been taken in the environmental agendas in the region, not everyone seems to be benefiting in the same ways, and gaps in knowledge and action remain at the heart of people's concerns regarding climate change mitigation, and where these people expressed the fear of being excluded in the public and private spheres. So therefore, it is important to recognize the knowledge of those people, including women, older generations, indigenous people, and so on, and to invest in that knowledge to build community resilience. Individuals and groups who might be marginalized or excluded in research and in decision-making based on their gender, ethnicity, social status, economic class, etc., need to be represented through the relevant research and policy making, which I see as an opportunity for the current and future development agendas in the region. Simply to recognize and invest in the skills and knowledge of diverse social groups is very important. And in my work, we refer to this as asset-based community-led development. So it is recognizing the strength of the community and asking the community or giving the community the opportunity to be leaders in the development and mitigation of climate change in this case. There are numerous examples that could be mentioned, and other panelists have also mentioned several already. Within my work, I saw these opportunities at the grassroots levels, ranging from women's advocacy for equal land ownership in Morocco, to Palestinian refugees building rooftop gardens in refugee camps to grow part of what they eat, to young entrepreneurs working on innovative solutions to water scarcity all around the Mediterranean. These are just few examples, and there are more when we look at the grassroots level and the assets that are available within the communities themselves. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that getting the marginalized groups engaged and active as agents in their own climate resilience building leads everyone to be stronger and more resilient to climate change. And I'll stop here and thank you again for your question, and I hope I addressed it well enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Shami. Very inspiring, and also particularly given very practical and very direct examples, particularly coming from your experience also working with refugees and Palestinian refugees. So thank you so much for that. And I'm looking forward to the further discussion as well. So now it's my pleasure to invite my colleague, or our colleague Harsh, as one of the speakers. So Harsh is our global lead for disruptive technology at the World Bank, and he has over 20 years has been working with the World Bank and has led and supported several environmental, water and natural resources projects, analytical support operations across all the regions, so across the globe. And he has also been a global lead for watersheds and is currently co-leading the bank's hydro informatics focal area and leads the disruptive kits, the knowledge, information and data services help desks, and he holds a Bachelor of Technology in Civil Engineering and a Master's in Environmental and Resource Engineering and a PhD in Water and Resource and Environmental Systems Engineering from Howard University. Harsh, it's really a pleasure to have you with us, and I'm always looking forward to your very inspiring talks. And I wanted to hear a little bit from you where you see what are the innovative approaches to scale up climate-smart natural resources management in MENA. Over to you, Harsh.
Hey, thank you very much for that, Leah, and thanks to the organizers for the invite. I think all the speakers today have already summarized a lot of the different aspects that I was going to showcase. So I'll limit myself to maybe two areas of innovation going ahead. One is the need to take a more integrated spatial multi-sectoral approach, something that many of the speakers have also alluded to. And also the other aspect is on using technology in better ways so that a lot of this effort can be done in a smarter way going ahead, both for climate mitigation and adaptation aspects, and integrating those into the environment, natural resources management and water resources management aspects. Since I'm a tail ender, and to make sure that I can fit in the time, I'm going to save a few thousand words by showing you some visuals as well as part of this. So as part of this, just to get started, if we look at that first aspect, which is why is it essential to take an integrated spatial approach? We often look at it in hydrologic terms, and as Cavi said, we can't look at it just as a hydrologic issue in terms of looking at how much rainfall, water balance, and other things in the area. But every time we have a use like rain-fed agriculture, we have a department usually in charge of it. And if we have many users, we have many departments in charge of this. And the challenge here is that whether you're looking at a full river basin level like the Euphrates Tigris, or looking at a small little micro watershed, it's just different scales of the same issue. And there's a need to look at all of these together. For example, if there's a lot of deforestation, could lead to, as we heard from Carol, more sediment coming down these systems, in which case they could fill up the live storage of many of these reservoirs, affect the services that they can provide downstream and so on, or to look at issues of pollution and other things and all that, because everything here is related to everything else. So there's a need to see if we can take a more spatial, multi-sectoral approach to looking at these aspects across what we call the 3 I's, the information, institutions, and investment aspects. So now what usually happens is this, right, where we all go in with a particular angle and say, I'm only going to look at hydropower, I'm only going to look at erosion, only at on-farm water management, and so on. So we all see what we want to see, as Einstein said in the theory of relativity, that what seems to be happening depends on who's observing it. So we all observe one little piece of the beast. And the whole challenge is, how do you look at this in an integrated way to see the whole animal, but also do this in a way that's implementable. So this is where Einstein also said, keep things simple, but not simpler, right? So to make sure that we recognize the complexities that are there. And when it comes to things like on the information side, there's a whole revolution that's already happened in terms of data analytics, knowledge learning, which we really should capitalize on in the region. And also the bit that we heard from many of the other speakers, to make sure that there's good enabling systems in place, whether it be on the institutional side, I think Carol's second point, to get people to work with each other, or also on enabling policies, whether it be simple things like data access and so on, because in the entire MENA region, I'm sure you will be hard pressed to find one river gauge where the information is being shared in real time in machine readable formats in using these open access protocols, right? So it's the same thing in my own country as well. So this is the kind of thing we really should move towards if we are getting serious about addressing these issues better in the future. And also on the investment side, there's a lot we can do, and we'll come back to this in a second, in terms of how to rethink a lot of these aspects. To help us along, we have a lot of new technologies along the way, these disruptive technologies which disrupt old ways of thinking about this, where you can disrupt the data value chain to go from data to information to knowledge to decision support, where you can think about new ways in which you can collect data from different sources, analyze them in new ways, and make them accessible to help change decisions. Also, new ways in changing the way you make things or changing the way you interact with stakeholders like this that we are doing, but many other ways. And any one of these has the ability to change what we are talking about. For example, if curated meats really catches on as people expect in the next decade, this could completely change our livestock industry, right? So and this is where, as some of the speakers said, we need to think about what's plan B for the people who are involved with livestock management, the 1.3 billion people involved with that globally, or to try and see how you can also look at upstream industries like pasture, which consume 70% of the world's water, and so on, as well as downstream industries of transport and other things. So there's probably going to be a very different world in the next 10, 20 years. And we need to start getting ready for this in all aspects of the work that we do. And especially on the data side, even in leading up to that, ways of collecting data from the ground, collecting data from the skies, collecting data from the termites, and also getting different ways of analyzing these, using a lot of the buzzwords that we have on the technology side, making more of these accessible, not only to different departments to share with each other, but also every stakeholder, so which is every citizen of every country, to try and make sure that a lot of the insights are based on actual data and so on. And this is where the MENA region, along with many other regions, are are in a place which, as I think Cavi put it, in some ways it's good to be at the South Pole because the wind can only blow north, because there's a lot of improvement that could be done in terms of making these more accessible. Because today it's really hard to find even basic data on any of the aspects related to natural resource management and water. So now the thing is, this is where for even taking any of the decisions, it's there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of data, converting it into information, knowledge, through not only analytical work, but stakeholder processes, so that decisions can be supported. And this is something where the entire ecosystem then needs to be strengthened going ahead. And on that's for the more operational side. But on the planning, investment planning side, there's been a lot of effort, as we heard from Carol earlier, on these more structural measures that are there. And now slowly people are doing more on looking at non-structural measures, where, as we heard from Khalud, there's a lot of communities getting involved with a lot of these activities. And there's a lot of these which could be second generation activities. After watersheds are stabilized, you can do a lot in terms of smaller hydropower, or being able to make sure that a lot of the improvements can trickle down to different levels and so on. But a lot of these can become climate smart investments, whether it be based on simple things for resilience, which could be done, or simple things related to even mitigation in terms of a lot of the use of solar bits or the blue carbon or other types of things, and new ways to create social safety nets through insurance, or even to get the payment for ecosystem services type schemes and other things going. And a lot of these nature-based solutions, as we heard from many of the speakers, could be huge, but the big issue is, why aren't people picking up this $20 bill, right? And that's where there's a lot of enabling work that's required in terms of awareness, in terms of connections, in terms of making sure that there's capacity to look at these aspects. And we can learn a lot from global activities. The bank has been proud to support a lot of activities around the world in this regard, whether it be in China, where just the lowest plateau programs pulled some 2.5 million people out of poverty, or a new generation of investments which are across environment and water in new ways, where there's huge eco-compensation, which is a different kind of payment for ecosystem services that they're doing, or things that they're doing on their own in the private sector, for example, like ant forests. Please do look at these. I'm sure you'll get these presentations. So very neat ways in which you can scale up a lot of the work. or in India, in states like my own, where Bangalore is, for example, there's been a lot of award-winning programs on looking at integrated approaches for watershed management, using a lot of both Earth observation and local information to help make better systems for monitoring evaluation. Or in Ethiopia, where a lot of the community-based efforts are underway to help bring together a lot of the communities for being able to participate in these kinds of activities in the area, or new types of analytics that are helping in places like Lake Victoria to use ways of trying to target which places to go after, or to try and decide which areas you want to first do as a priority management, and so on. And also different levels of action, whether you're looking at big watershed plans all the way to local village level plans, to see how they cascade and work with each other, and also how they work across sectors. In Nepal, for example, we've been trying to look at how roads projects can take a larger watershed approach to try and make sure that a lot of those activities can be better managed in a changing climate. And in new programs like in Nigeria, I'll end with this. There's a lot of activities now underway to help pull together a knowledge base in terms of where do people live, where do livestock live, what kind of climate there is in different places, or land cover, land use, and take a lot of these into ways in which you can explore all of the systems that are there in terms of the watersheds at different scales. So you could say looking at Lake Chad and the Niger Basin, or the sub-watersheds in different places. So they're creating new strategic watershed plans that go across different sectors as a way, as an instrument to bring everybody's views together. And within each of these, a lot of these micro watersheds, where you could look in more detail at activities that could be done and within a particular micro watershed in a larger strategic watershed. So a lot of these could be really useful in the MENA area, and even the drier areas, which are similar to MENA in northern Nigeria. They're trying to develop new tools now to do a lot of automation based on technology, such as for any location, looking at a menu of what could be the things that you could do in that area based on, say, let's say the slope or the land use type or the rainfall or other parameters. And for each one of these to leverage a lot of these open data and knowledge services that are there from places like WOCAT and others, to try and see what things could be done in each of these different locations and analyze them in different ways. And a lot of these could be further strengthened with new tools, such as looking at drone data, for example, which we're using a lot in Nigeria, to leverage not only being able to see a lot of these areas at very high 1 to 2 centimeter type resolution, but doing analytics which would take months before. For example, for any one of these places to leverage cloud services to say, let's just look at the elevation to see which areas are flood prone, which areas are below a certain level or above a certain level, or to be able to start doing quick online analytics, even from your phone or other systems, by taking a lot of this information and pulling it together and using these kind of new cloud services to measure distances or areas, or even more complicated aspects such as elevation profiles and other things. So the big issue here is to see if all this can then be used to help think about visualizing a landscape in new ways. So creating a digital twin of an area and seeing what would this area look like if you had solar irrigation, if you had something else. So to look at what the future might bring before you actually do the investments, and be able to then have this as tools to be able to discuss with communities to see what kinds of future they would like to have, what would they like their land to look like in the future in this area. So there's a lot that could be done on bringing together these spatial multi-sectoral approaches across the 3 I's. And there's a lot that could be done in terms of leveraging a lot of new technology that we have in terms of access for these areas, so that we can help see the whole beast, hopefully, as we go into the future. So thanks a lot, and happy to take any more questions.
Thank you very much, Harsh, and also for this very inspiring visual journey through various technologies that can be utilized and also visualized before investing or before moving large-scale infrastructure that may not be needed at that kind of point, but really to phase out and see what could be done moving forward. So I think we have about a few minutes left, and I wanted to use this opportunity really to thank all of our panelists for the very interesting and informative views, but also for the provocative ideas and in discussions and in inputs, from which I personally have learned a lot. And I also wanted to thank our audience for being with us and throughout this session. And I really hope also you found the discussion and the inputs and the thoughts inspiring and thought-provoking. And for me personally, a couple of points have not crossed my mind yet. So I'm really very grateful for the panelists for sharing those and give a lot of food for thought. And I would like to wrap it up with highlighting and take away a couple of the highlighted messages from the panelists. So I particularly would like to go back to Carol, where she underscored that natural ecosystems, if managed sustainably, can really offer short and long-term solutions and multiple environmental and social economic benefits. And there's really also a need to create more awareness at the local and national, at the regional level on the environmental and social economic contributions of natural assets and the need to protect them for current and future generations. And Carol made a very strong point also in terms of using nature-based solutions for cities and to shared experiences for developing 2 plans for urban resilience for 2 cities in Morocco, and one thinks about moving away from engineering solutions more to nature-based solutions, also in term, and she brought up the example on water management and how to better manage watersheds, but also for the need for coordination and a consolidation of minds, and I think of minds and disciplines, and I think that was a very important point. But also, especially for addressing climate change and sustainably manage natural and ecosystems that are really key, as they contribute both to mitigation as well as adaptation. Then Professor Cavi really reminded also us on the political economy of natural resources management, and I think that's particularly important and particularly important for the region, and also in terms of water and agricultural problems of the Middle East that must be studied with a political economic lens, but also not only. And that's therefore not only from a technology and science lesson. Water scarcity and bankruptcy and degradation of wetlands and rivers have really contributed to the situation on the ground. And it's important also to understand that the region relies a lot on food imports, and it's important to address this situation at home. And that's something now we especially see with the unfolding conflict in the Ukraine that has causes even more implications for a region that heavily relies on food imports or exports, low value crops, and even exports then indirectly water. And I think that's a very interesting discussion point. And particularly also given that the economies in the regions are very resource dependent. And therefore, to address the water bankruptcy in the region, one needs to understand that the critical role water and agriculture really play also to provide jobs and support livelihoods, particularly for the poor. And one needs to really understand here, as I mentioned at the onset, and as Professor Cavi outlined in his points, the political economy lens, and I think that's extremely critical. And also really to understand also what water in general is providing in terms of jobs for the poor, also particularly through the agriculture sector, and particularly the viewpoint, unless that there are major reforms are being put to play and major reforms to the economic development models of the region. This is something one needs to really address rather than looking into quick fixes and technical solutions to water and food security that will then fail over the long term, and that have also failed already in the past. And I think this is very important points. Then Dr. Kholoud's main message here was really, she talked about the social justice in relation to climate change, and reminded us on this very tragic example of the young boy that fell into a well in Morocco and unfortunately died. And we have followed it with heavy hearts all over the news, of course, also from where we are sitting. really made the connection here to the reference on the unauthorized digging of wells in response to water insecurity. And I think that was really a very a pressing example. And also she highlighted that while there has been growing attention to the social dimensions of the effects to climate change in recent years, many groups, including children, women, people with disabilities, for example, or social minorities, really continue to be at the margin of climate security research and policy making. And it's also very important, and I think she very eloquently stressed that it's really important to look at the economic effects of this inequality, and really important to see that. And also when looking at migration aspects and looking at migration patterns, that often, particularly the most vulnerable, are left behind. And here promoting gender equality and tackling both discriminatory norms and inequality across the resources is really a vital ingredient or a vital component of effective climate change adaptation strategies that is very clearly very close and dear to her heart. So thank you so much for sharing these thoughts, but also sharing very concrete experiences from on the ground, and particularly in working with your work with your refugees. And then finally, Harsh really reminded us also that addressing climate change and natural resources management challenges in MENA require us to collectively or consistently think outside of the box. And here that a more multi-sectoral approach and enabled by innovative approaches and technologies, and really finding ways on how to move ahead and smarter. And I think you very nicely also illustrated this throughout your presentation in various shapes and forms. And really you shared examples of disruptive technologies and how they can be used, and how they are really important to be integrated into approaches. And they should be used to trigger transformative changes in the way we see and manage natural resources in the region. And as always, Harsh is always a step ahead, and I've learned a new word, as well. I've learned the new word gamification. So thanks, Harsh, for that as well. And really, as a final thoughts to combine the view and the messages from all of our speakers. I think natural resources have been at the core of development of the countries in the region, starting with food provision, shelter, but we really have learned a lot over time that natural ecosystems are essential for sustaining a country's or region's economy, and that they are important for sustainable biodiversity and really stabilizing the local and regional climate. And especially over the last 10 to 15 years, we really have experienced that natural resources degradation can lead to substantial social disruption and conflict, as the impacts are especially harder for vulnerable and marginalized, particular communities and groups that depend on natural resources. And that was also very strongly coming out by the remarks reflected on by Professor Cavi and as well as Dr. Al-Ajama, where they really brought up also the dimension on conflict. And so I think it's really important to take an inclusive and integrated approach to natural resources management and to secure the livelihoods of millions and the health of our planet. And I hope we all can collectively continue to be part of that solution. And with that, I'll really thank you all. And I would like to hand over to Mohammed for his closing thoughts.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you to all the panelists for very thoughtful discourse. And as you summarized, Leah, a lot for us to understand and process. With that, I'll say we are concluding this session. For those of you that are attending our next panel for the day, which is our last panel for day one, which will be starting here at the half of the hour in about 25 minutes. So I'll ask you all to join us again, audience, to continue in our